The United States Marine Corps does not own a tank, not a single one. No M1A1 Abrams, no tank battalion, no tank crewman military occupational specialty. The last Marine tanks rolled out of 29 Palms, California on flatbed trucks in July 2020. The last ones left Camp Lejeune, North Carolina at the end of that same month. The final active duty tank battalion was deactivated in May 2021, and the vehicles themselves were handed over to the Army. For a service that fought at Tarawa, at Inchon, at Fallujah, that is not a small thing. The Marine Corps spent 75 years building doctrine around armor coming ashore behind the infantry. Then it gave all of it away on purpose. And in May 2026, that same service began operationally fielding a wheeled 8-wheel drive vehicle weighing about 35 tons, carrying a stabilized 30mm cannon in a turret with nobody sitting in it. It is called the ACV-30. It swims off the back of an amphibious ship, drives itself onto a beach, and keeps going inland for another 250 miles. So the question is obvious. Why does a service that decided it did not need a 68-ton tank now need a 35-ton vehicle with a cannon on top? Why is the answer to giving up armor a smaller gun on a lighter hull that floats? The answer is not about firepower. It is about geography, about two catastrophes that happened 3 weeks apart in the summer of 2020, and about a bet on what the next war actually looks like. In March 2020, the 38th Commandant of the Marine Corps, General David Berger, released a document called Force Design 2030. It was not a modernization plan in the usual sense. It was a subtraction plan. Berger's assessment was blunt. The Corps was overinvested in capabilities built for the wars it had just fought, and underinvested in the ones it would fight next. Long-range precision fires were short. Air defense was short. Unmanned systems barely existed in the force structure. Something had to pay for it. Berger chose the tanks. All of them. Every tank battalion eliminated. Artillery cannon batteries cut. More than 1,300 Marines saw their careers directly affected, and 4 military occupational specialties disappeared from the books. The reasoning was geographic. The Corps was reorienting toward the Indo-Pacific, toward the first island chain, toward scattered atolls and narrow beaches and archipelagos where the fight is measured in hundreds of miles of water between one piece of dirt and the next. An Abrams weighs roughly 68 tons. It burns fuel at a rate that requires an entire logistics tail behind it, and critically, it cannot swim. Getting one ashore means a landing craft, and a landing craft means a well deck, and well deck space on an amphibious ship is the most contested real estate in the fleet. Every tank you bring is several things you do not bring. Berger's calculation was that in a Pacific Island campaign, the Marine Corps would never get to use the tanks in the way that justified carrying them, so they went. What replaced them, organizationally, was a concept called Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations. The idea is that small Marine units seize or occupy scattered pieces of terrain, an island, a headland, a stretch of coast, and turn them into temporary firing positions and sensor sites, holding them long enough to threaten enemy shipping and then moving before they can be targeted. The Corps built new formations around it. The 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment stood up in Hawaii in March 2022. The 12th Marine Regiment on Okinawa was redesignated as the 12th Marine Littoral Regiment in November 2023. These are not units built to storm a beach in the old sense. They are built to be dispersed, hard to find, and lethal at range. A tank battalion has no place in that picture, but a Marine Littoral Regiment still has to get its people from a ship to a beach that may be defended, and once they are there, they still have to be able to shoot at things. But subtraction leaves a hole. If the tanks are gone and the enemy still has light armor, still has fortified positions, still has infantry dug in behind concrete, what shoots at those things once the Marines are ashore and the ships have pulled back over the horizon? For a while, the honest answer was not much. 3 weeks after 1st Tank Battalion loaded out at 29 Palms, the Marine Corps lost something else. The AAV-7 had been carrying Marines from ship to shore since the early 1970s. A tracked steel box, flat-bottomed, slow in the water, riding low with the waves washing over the top of it. Generations of Marines learned the amphibious assault sitting inside one, in the dark, with the ramp closed. On July 30th, 2020, one of them was returning to the well deck of a ship during a training exercise off the coast of Southern California. It took on water. It went down in deep ocean. 8 Marines and 1 Navy corpsman died. The investigations that followed were brutal reading. Maintenance shortfalls that had left the vehicle in poor material condition. Crews who had not completed the required waterborne training. Safety craft that were not positioned to respond in the time the situation demanded. Not one catastrophic failure, but a chain of ordinary institutional shortcuts that ran out of slack at the worst possible moment, in a vehicle designed 50 years old, operating in conditions it should never have been in. The Marine Corps suspended waterborne AAV operations, and the suspension effectively became permanent. The vehicle that had defined the Corps' ship-to-shore identity for half a century was finished as an amphibious platform. So consider where the Marine Corps stood in August 2020. In a single month, it had given away every tank it owned and lost confidence in the vehicle that carried infantry to the beach. The two halves of an amphibious assault, the armor and the transport, were both gone. That is the vacuum the ACV-30 was built to fill. Not as a tank replacement, because it is not one. As something the Corps had never actually had before, there was a third problem, and it is the one that gets talked about least. The light armored vehicle, the LAV-25, entered Marine service in 1983. It carries a 25mm M242 Bushmaster cannon, and it has been the Reconnaissance Battalion's primary armored vehicle for over 4 decades. By the 2020s, it was, by any measure, old. The obvious answer was to build a new LAV. The Marine Corps decided not to. The April 2021 Force Design Update stated flatly that a year of experimentation had invalidated the requirement to replace the LAV-25 with a comparable manned armored vehicle on a one-for-one basis. Instead, the Corps began pursuing an advanced reconnaissance vehicle, and senior officers were candid that the ARV was less a vehicle than a set of capabilities, a bundle of sensors, unmanned systems, and precision fires that might eventually take some physical form. Prototype work went to General Dynamics Land Systems and Textron Systems. That is an honest way to run a program. It is also a slow one. And while the Corps studied what mobile reconnaissance should become, the LAVs kept aging, and the direct fire gap kept sitting there unfilled. Which brings us to the vehicle itself, and to the reason the 30mm cannon ended up where it did. The amphibious combat vehicle is an 8x8 wheeled platform developed by BAE Systems in partnership with Iveco Defense Vehicles of Italy. It reached Milestone C, the decision point that authorizes production, in June 2018 following operational analysis conducted under the Corps' Ground Combat Tactical Vehicle Strategy. BAE was down-selected as sole vendor. Full-rate production began in fiscal year 2021 with an order for 72 vehicles. The design decisions tell you what the Corps learned from the AAV, where the old vehicle was a flat-bottomed steel box. The ACV sits on a blast-resistant hull with a pointed underside, the same shape the Army and Marine Corps adopted across their vehicle fleets after 2 decades of roadside bombs in Iraq and Afghanistan. It weighs roughly 35 tons and carries a payload of about 3 1/3 tons. It has an operational range on land of approximately 523 kilometers, 325 miles, and BAE states it can continue inland operations for more than 250 miles after an amphibious insertion. That last number is the one that matters strategically. The AAV was a ship-to-shore connector that ran out of usefulness once the ramp dropped. The ACV is meant to swim ashore and then keep operating as a fighting vehicle deep inland on wheels at highway speeds without a tank transporter behind it. The swimming itself is worth pausing on because it is the hardest engineering problem in the vehicle and the one most people assume is solved. A tracked vehicle in the water is essentially a steel box being pushed by its tracks, slow, inefficient, and dependent on staying level. The ACV instead pushes itself through the water with 2 water jets at the stern, throwing a wake behind it the way a boat does, and steering the way a boat does. BAE Systems rates it for operations up to sea state 3, waves running roughly 4 feet, and cites a water speed of around 6 knots. On land, a 690 horsepower engine drives all 8 wheels, and the vehicle holds highway speed on a road without a transporter under it. 6 knots does not sound like much. It is not meant to. The number that matters is the surf zone, the narrow, violent band where deep water becomes beach, and where waves break with enough force to roll a vehicle sideways. The AAV died in water like that. The ACV was designed around the assumption that it would have to survive it repeatedly, with Marines inside, at night, in a formation, while nobody has time to be careful. The personnel variant, the ACVP, was the first to field. A command and control variant followed, entering service from 2022 with battle management systems, expanded communications, and additional onboard power generation, so a commander can run a fight from inside a moving vehicle. Both share the same hull, the same protection, the same mobility. The program has not been without hard lessons. In 2022, after incidents in the surf zone off Camp Pendleton, the Corps temporarily restricted ACV waterborne operations while it worked through towing procedures and surf transit conditions. Those restrictions were subsequently lifted, but they are a reminder that the physics of driving a 35-ton wheeled vehicle through breaking waves are unforgiving, no matter how new the design is. If watching a service deliberately give away its heaviest weapon and then spend 6 years engineering a replacement for a capability it chose to delete changes how you think about how militaries actually make decisions, subscribing to the channel is the best way to keep these breakdowns coming, because the interesting part is not the hull. It is what sits on top of it. The ACV-30 mounts a Kongsberg RRT-20 remotely operated turret carrying an Mk-44 Bushmaster 230mm cannon and a coaxial 7.62mm machine gun. The word that matters in that sentence is remotely. Watch an older armored vehicle and you can always find the gunner. There is a hatch on the turret and a helmet under it and a set of shoulders riding above the armor line. That has been the shape of an infantry fighting vehicle for 60 years, and it has always come with the same bill. The most exposed part of the vehicle is where the crewman sits. The ACV-30's turret has no hatch and no helmet. It turns, it tracks, it elevates, and nobody is inside it. The gunner is down in the hull with everyone else, behind the same protection as the Marines he is carrying. What he gives up is the view he used to get by putting his own head into the weather. What he gets back is the ability to fight a vehicle that has been hit. That trade also buys space. A manned turret takes a bite out of the troop compartment that no amount of clever packaging recovers. Remove the crewman and the bite disappears, which on a vehicle whose entire reason for existing is delivering infantry to a beach is not a small accounting entry. The gun itself is the Bushmaster II, firing a 30mm round at a published rate of roughly 200 per minute. It is stabilized, which is the detail that changes how the vehicle is used. An unstabilized gun means stopping to shoot, and stopping in open ground is how vehicles die. A stabilized gun means the ACV-30 can put accurate fire on a position while it is still moving toward it. It also carries two natures of ammunition at once and switches between them instantly, so the same gun answers a light armored vehicle and a squad behind a wall without anyone climbing out to change anything. Why 30mm and not 25? Partly because the 30mm round carries substantially more explosive filler and more penetrating energy at range than the 𝗚𝗵𝗶𝗽𝗀's 25mm. Partly because of what has been happening in Ukraine, where light armor, infantry in prepared positions, and small drones have all had to be engaged by the same weapon, often at the same time. Across the American military, there has been a steady move toward upgunning existing vehicles for exactly that reason. The Marine Corps is not leading that trend. It is joining it. The Army has been down a version of this road already. It upgunned part of its Stryker fleet in Europe with 30mm cannon in remote turrets after concluding that a heavy machine gun was no longer enough against Russian light armor. The difference is that a Stryker is a road vehicle. It arrives through a port or an airfield, and someone else has to secure both of those first. The ACV-30 carries the same class of gun to places where there is no port and no airfield, and it gets there by driving off the back of a ship into open water. And with the tank battalions gone, the arithmetic produces an odd result. The 30mm cannon on the ACV-30 becomes the largest direct fire gun the Marine Corps fields on a ground vehicle, a service that used to put a 120mm smoothbore on a beach now tops out at 30. Does that sound like progress, or does it sound like a service quietly accepting less? The program's timeline shows how deliberately the Corps moved. Production representative test vehicles were contracted in 2022. The first ACV-30 test vehicle was delivered in February 2024 for operational evaluation and systems integration. In November 2024, Kongsberg received a $51 million contract for long lead turret components, the parts with the longest manufacturing queues, ordered early precisely so the production line would not stall waiting on them. Then came the money. On February 3, 2026, BAE Systems announced a $195 million contract for 30 additional turreted amphibious combat vehicles, pushing total ACV-30s ordered under that contract past 150. Do that division and you get roughly $6.5 million per vehicle, though the Kongsberg turret is procured separately, so the true delivered cost of a complete ACV-30 sits above that figure. 17 days later, in February 2026, a new production line for the 30mm cannon opened in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. That is a smaller headline than a contract award and a more revealing one. Building a factory is a decision measured in decades, not budget years. It means the gun at the center of the Corps' ground modernization no longer arrives through an overseas supply chain that a war could interrupt. Services do not build domestic production lines for equipment they expect to cancel. The fiscal year 2026 budget confirms the same read. The plan funds continued procurement of 59 ACV, 30 gun variants alongside the first 32, ACV-R recovery vehicles, the wreckers that tow, lift, and repair the rest of the family in the field. You do not buy recovery vehicles for a fleet you intend to keep small. Then, on May 28, 2026, BAE Systems announced that the first operational fielding of the ACV-30 to the United States Marine Corps was underway. Fielding is a specific word. It does not mean testing. It means the vehicles are going to operational units, into the hands of Marines who will take them to sea. The benchmark the Corps set for initial operational capability was 6 vehicles integrated into an ACV-equipped amphibious assault line platoon. Not a demonstration, but a functioning combat formation with the gun vehicles woven into it. So return to where this started. The Marine Corps gave away 68-ton tanks it could not realistically land on a contested Pacific island, and lost the 50-year-old tracked vehicle that had carried its infantry through the surf. What it has replaced them with is neither a tank nor a simple connector. It is a wheeled vehicle that swims out of a well deck, crosses the surf zone under its own power, drives ashore, and then fights alongside the Marines it just delivered, with a stabilized medium-caliber cannon operated by a gunner who never has to stick his head above the armor. That is the answer to why. Not because 30mm beats 120, it does not, and nobody in the Corps pretends otherwise. The ACV-30 exists because the Marine Corps decided that in the fight it expects, the gun that arrives is worth more than the bigger gun that stays on the ship. It is a BET, and it is not a hedged one. The Corps did not keep a reserve tank battalion. It did not build a heavier variant in parallel. It divested the armor, absorbed the criticism from a generation of officers who spent their careers around it, and committed to a lighter, distributed, sea-based force that carries its firepower on 8 wheels. If that bet is right, the ACV-30 will look like the vehicle that let Marines fight on islands where nothing heavier could ever have gone. If it is wrong, it will be remembered as the moment the United States Marine Corps went ashore with the smallest direct fire gun it had carried in 80 years. The vehicles are being delivered right now. The answer is somewhere ahead of us.